So, this is very exciting. The first trailer for James Gunn's Superman has finally released. This, of course, this was the film originally titled Superman Legacy. Now it's just Superman. Though noticeably, the trailer didn't actually have a title card, because we all know what it's called, right? Perhaps this is more of a teaser than a full trailer, because usually, I guess, like, it's really semantics, but I would say a trailer has at least a little bit of dialogue, and gives us a little bit more of a sense of the general maybe conceit of the story. Whereas this is more of just like it's more kind of flashes of like what we'll be seeing, right? But it's a very juicy teaser nonetheless. It's a good length. It's not like a minute long. And we get good looks at Superman now, David Cornsweet in the outfit. We saw that original picture that was released, and I did a whole story about that. But now we're seeing everything in action. We also get to see his Clark Kent. It kind of looks like Noah Centineo, right? The guy from Netflix. He has kind of like the curly bush top kind of thing. We also got our first real good look at Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, and Nicholas Hoult as Lex Luthor, looking deliciously evil as Lex Luthor should. We also got Crypto the Super Dog. This is the first time I think we're getting him in live action. And I believe I read that, because I think in the comics he's almost more like a greyhound kind of dog, but James Gunn changed it to like this breed of dog that you see in the trailer, because that's like the dog he got that kind of dog during COVID. And he feels really attached to that dog, so he's like, well, let's play around with the mythology a little. I don't think it's super important that Crypto's a greyhound, right? And there was also a sprinkling of other DC superheroes, like one of the Green Lanterns. There was Hawkgirl. I think some other more obscure people that I don't know, but if you know comics and like if you know comics the way James Gunn knows it, like there's a lot of deep cuts here that I wouldn't even know. But we got a lot of really great looks at everything, right? A lot of stuff and good looks at that stuff. The music for the trailer is like this electric guitar version of John Williams' Superman theme. Someone compared it to like, because John Williams' music is almost like sacrosanct. It is like the national anthem, right? And someone compared this version of it to like when Jimi Hendrix did the electric guitar version of the Star Spangled Banner at Woodstock, right? And this has been a very successful trailer. It was viewed over 250 million times. And reportedly, it's the most viewed trailer in the history of both DC and Warner Brothers. And here's what I'm going to talk a lot about Gunn's kind of modus operandi here, but I'll talk a lot about that later, but I do have a quote from Gunn here saying, quote, "This movie at the end of the day is not about power. This movie is about, in the loose sense of the word, a human being struggling with his day-to-day life. And we see a different aspect of him at the beginning. I thought it was a cool place to start the trailer and the movie, frankly," end quote. Because, yeah, it starts with him landing in the Arctic, presumably near the Fortress of Solitude. He's all bloody, and he's like, he's like wheezing, basically. So, again, very different kind of Superman, right? And if you're really excited about this, you don't have to wait too long. This will be coming out July 11th, 2025. So a little bit of background on this. You have a lot of pieces all coming together to create something really interesting here. James Gunn, of course, very popular writer and director, most notably he didn't direct, but he wrote the 2 theatrical Scooby-Doo live action movies. As my fiance Viviana affectionately calls the first one, Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Or not Zombie Island, on Spooky Island. Zombie Island is an animated one, but it's just called Scooby-Doo, Viviana. I know you're watching. It's just called Scooby-Doo. It's not Scooby-Doo on Spooky Island. But of course, most famously, James Gunn wrote and directed the 3 Guardians of the Galaxy movies for the MCU, as well as the 2021 Suicide Squad film. The Suicide Squad. It gets a the. And he's primarily known best for his like ensemble stories that have a decent balance of comedy and sincerity, right? And kind of, his work's a little hit or miss for me. People love the Guardians films, and they call it not only the best films in the MCU, but some of the best films ever. And I'm like, I don't know. It's a little hit or miss for me, but I see the appeal. I see why people like Gunn's work. And famously, how we kind of got here, because it's like, okay, well, how did he end up now writing and directing the Superman movie? Famously, he got fired from Marvel. I think it was back like 2017 or 2018. It was kind of during it wasn't really quite Me Too, but it was in that same kind of era. conservatives kind of wanted to get like their casualties, like they wanted to take someone down from like the liberal side, because James Gunn, of course, is very liberal. So they found all these old edgy tweets he had tweeted that were admittedly very tasteless or distasteful. Making jokes about things you shouldn't make jokes about. And during the fervor, Disney, reading the writing on the wall with all these, other situations happening with like actual bad stuff, they fired him. They removed him from the third Guardians movie. DC smartly scooped him up, and they were like, hey, why don't you make a Suicide Squad movie, which is basically like the Guardians of the Galaxy. But sure enough, all of this blew over, so Marvel decided, you know what, let's have you come back for Guardians 3, finish the trilogy. But he was still doing Suicide Squad. So we ended up doing Suicide Squad in 2021, and then the third Guardians, I think, came out in 2023, right? Once Warner Brothers had its big merger, they decided they needed to restart their DC cinematic universe. What they had done with the Zack Snyder kind of offshoots of everything just was not working. So they decided to hire him, along with another guy, Peter Safran, to lead this new enterprise, kind of like how Kevin Feige, is like kind of the creator and like the mastermind behind the MCU. But interesting though, unlike Kevin Feige, James Gunn is like a writer director himself, whereas Kevin Feige is mostly just a producer. So the question was like, well, will he just kind of produce them and kind of shepherd the creative vision like Feige would, or is he gonna like make some of these movies? And sure enough, he's writing and directing the very first one. And his kind of vision for this, he wants to contrast it with like the MCU, and he wants the films to feel distinct. And he said, quote, I want each project to have the feelings of the individual artist that's working on it, and to give them a lot of freedom, as long as it works, to create something special. Because what I found through Marvel, what wasn't exciting was when movies were tonally the same, end quote. And that's such a great insight. Not because it's revolutionary, I feel like everyone says that, but it's really great to hear someone who's been part of the machine say it. And that's been the big problem with Marvel, is that the kind of... And they were a little bit different when you started. The original Iron Man is very different than the Incredible Hulk, which was very different than Thor and Captain America. Like, they all have their very distinct feels. But then once Avengers came out, it felt like every movie was basically just trying to be the Avengers in terms of the tone, like that kind of Joss Whedon tone. So I think Gunn is acknowledging, like, that led to a lot of sameness and people kind of getting bored with it because there was nothing new. Even if average moviegoers aren't attuned to, like, the language of film, implicitly they understand that they're basically just getting the same thing over and over and over and over. And again, this film now, this new Superman movie, will be the beginning of a new DC cinematic universe. Like I said, the DCEU was an unmitigated disaster. Even if you like those films, like... If you like some of them, then you definitely don't like some of the others. Like, there's no one, I think, who likes all of the movies in the DCEU or likes a large majority of them, right? And nevertheless, even if you did, they just never quite congealed into a cohesive universe. It's almost like the other extreme. They were just all so different and seemed to have completely different priorities. They never really cohered into anything interesting. And what will make this interesting, and I think what made Kevin Feige and the MCU work so well, is that Kevin Feige is a comic book nerd. He knows his stuff. And Gunn is similar. He has a deep knowledge and affection, from my understanding, he has a deep knowledge and affection for comics in general, specifically Marvel comics, or DC comics. He knows all the great stories, So that's how you're getting these deep cuts. And, not just doing the same story. It's not an origin story. He's going to basically already be Superman, and he knows all the different great stories, so he has a sense of what he can pull. He knows what ingredients that are already out there. Like, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, that piece of that story is really interesting. Let's maybe pluck that, and then that's kind of interesting, and let me add something from my own ideas here and make something really cool. And kind of talking about this being a little bit more of a comic booky movie, and again having more kind of esoteric deep cuts. James Gunn spoke about this, saying, quote, superhero movies have taken these characters and said, okay, it's Batman or it's Superman, but it's not any of the other stuff. We're embracing all of the Superman mythology. He has friends who are other superheroes. He has people he doesn't get along with who are with who are other superheroes. He has a lot of things that we love from the Superman comics that we haven't been able to see as much of in filmed media, and definitely have been able to see in a grounded way, which is what I hope we've created, end quote. And again, this is the beginning of this new cinematic universe. Other films have already been announced, and I think dated maybe, if not the exact day, but maybe like the month or at least the year. Other films have already been announced as like this first phase. The only one that's coming to mind is like a Batman movie. But again, it's cool because this is, despite other stuff being planned, this can kind of stand on its own in some ways. It will always be the first one. Though it's not the first Superman movie, of course. Notably, though, compared to something like Batman, he's had far less movies and far less actors portraying him. And I'm looking at just big screen movies. Because, of course, there's been a gajillion shows. Smallville was my gateway into Superman. To me, that's like the definitive Superman, or at least the Superman I like best. At least like the earlier seasons of it. But again, there's only been a couple portrayals, right? So famously, of course, is Christopher Reeve, who played Superman 4 times in the 1978 Superman, and then throughout the 80s in Superman 2, 3, and 4. And the quality and reception went down and down with each one. Then you had Brandon Routh, of course, playing the role in the 2006, I think it was 2006, Superman Returns, which I remember kind of liking as a kid, but it's kind of boring. It's kind of a little misguided by Bryan Singer. Awful guy. Then, of course, you have Henry Cavill, who was like the DCEU version, the DC Extended Universe version with Zack Snyder and Man of Steel, and then Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, and then Justice League. Both versions of both the Joss Whedon and Zack Snyder version. And now we have David Corenswet, right? So this guy, he's been in stuff before. This is like a huge level up for his career. And it seems like he really understands the character. He said, I forget who he was speaking to, but he said here, quote, "I think a lot of people consider Superman to be a naive character, at least to have a naivete about him. I think there's an element of that, but I think it really is just a sort of a blindness to the little imperfections and the little conflicts, the silly little things that we get caught up with as people. I tend to miss those, and I think Superman misses those, and that's what keeps him steadfastly and determinatively looking at the good and the hopeful and the future and grounded in the fun and playfulness of the present," end quote. And there's a really, I don't know if I wrote it down here, but he seems like he really gets it. And this movie's all about, I'm going to talk about this a lot. This movie seems to all be about hope, about the optimism of Superman. Very much to contrast the Henry Cavill, like almost sociopathic, emotionally detached Superman from like Man of Steel and Batman v Superman and things like that. They were like, when the costume designer first showed James Gunn like the initial costume idea, it was so colorful and bright, and James Gunn was like, "I like it, but I don't know, maybe is it too much?" And David Corenswet went, "No, this makes sense within the world of the story because Superman would want kids to know he's a good guy. He would want kids to know that he is someone they can trust. So he would want to have a suit that's appealing to children." And James Gunn went, "That's perfect. That's insane." Right? Just that little conversation gives you so much insight to the character that it is diegetically colored that way, right? But yeah, of all the other versions of all the other Superman films we've got, really only the original one from 1978 is really beloved by people. But again, the films struggle with the same thing all Superman stories do, regardless of the medium. How do you make a compelling story about a guy who's fighting people, but he's invincible? Right? Because there's no physical stakes unless there's kryptonite, but at that point now you've made him kind of not Superman, right? So the best Superman stories, from my understanding, because I'm not a comic nerd, I have read All-Star Superman. That's probably the only Superman comic I've ever read, because that was like a limited graphic novel, a limited series. But from my understanding, the best Superman stories focus on the emotional stakes of the conflicts rather than the physical ones, right? And it seems like that's what we're getting here, right? And like I said, Gunn seems to really want to focus on Superman's unwavering sincerity and selflessness, right? Again, Cavill Superman was like this detached, godlike figure. Contrast that with the Superman in this trailer, saving that little girl, right? That seems very small potatoes, but like to him, that is as important as like stopping the bomb is about to go off, right? Like, things like that are really important. David Cornswett's Superman cares deeply about others and their safety. Those are the stakes, right? Not his own physical safety, but the physical safety of others. And Gunn is really using Superman as almost like a cipher to look at our current world. And I have this extended quote, from Gunn about how Superman represents goodness and our capacity for goodness. And he says here, quote, "We do have a battered Superman at the beginning, and I think that is our country." Because it's very much following, where we are right now politically. Anyway, back to the quote. Quote, "I believe in the goodness of human beings, and I believe that most people in this country, despite their ideological beliefs or politics, are doing their best to get by and are trying to be good people, despite what it might seem like to the other side or what that other side might be. And I think this movie is about that. It's about the basic kindness of human beings, and that it can be seen as uncool or it can be seen as under siege when some of the darker voices are some of the louder voices. I live in a very rural part of Georgia, and I see the kindness and the beauty of the people every day who don't share all the same world beliefs as I do, but I think that's what the movie is about. The basic fundamental decency of human beings all over the world," end quote. That's really beautiful, right? And I think there is a fallacy with the idea of like, oh, we need civility, can't we just all get along? Because usually the bad actors abuse that and exploit that. But that's not what Gunn seems to be saying. He seems to be saying not tolerating, not being civil, but it's like what Jesus said, like, love your enemies, even as they persecute you. Like, giving yourself over completely and doing good for those who certainly don't deserve it, right? Because none of us really do. And that's what Superman represents, is that unbounded grace and that unbounded goodness. And I think this movie is hopefully going to break through some of the cynicism that we have. There was an IGN article posted following this trailer from writer Amelia Emberwing titled, "The new Superman trailer does the impossible. It will force you to feel hope." And I put a little quote from this article saying, quote, "You feel every second of this trailer. It almost forces you to, demanding that you take your hurt or your bitterness and dare to remember what hope feels like," end quote. So this could really capture the zeitgeist. Who knows? So much can happen between now and July, but just this trailer alone just gives me just a huge swell of hope, and I'm really excited for it. Again, I'm not James Gunn's kind of hit or miss for me, but this seems like he's dialing back all of his worst instincts that I don't really like. This seems like this could be a really, really special cinematic experience.
Wow, what an interesting story. I'm sure you have some thoughts about the topic, so comment below, let me know what you think. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It really, really helps people find the channel and makes me feel all warm inside. Until next time, I'm Peter Mancuso. Peace out.